The following teaching is by Jim Pugh through the ministry of God as Government. If you have never listened to one of our Bridge of Truth podcasts and wish to see all the topics taught through this Bridge of Truth ministry, please go to www.godisgovernment.com to find the inventory of Bridge of Truth podcasts. Now, welcome Jim Pugh as he presents another historical study of truth from history, Bible scripture, or current events.
The demise of the United States began with a brainstorm that struck Cecil John Rhodes on June 2, 1877, the day he became a lifetime member of the Oxford University Apollo chapter of the Masonic Order. Rhodes immediately put the revelation to paper in a document that he called his Confession of Faith. The idea, gleaming and dancing before one's eyes like a will-o'-the-wisp, at last frames itself into a plan. Why should we not form a secret society with but one object, the furtherance of the British rule, for the recovery of the United States, for the making the Anglo-Saxon race but one empire? Surely, he believed, if a group of wealthy Englishmen could spread the ideal of a universal brotherhood under the Gnostic religion of Freemasonry to every civilized country, a similar group by breeding and blood could bring about the union of mankind under British rule. The revelation that Rhodes received as a student at Oxford that spring day would give rise to the Anglo-American establishment and the mad scramble for Africa. It would inaugurate global warfare, the rise of communism, Keynesian economies, and free trade agreements. It would bring about the formation of the Pilgrim Societies, the Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Trilateral Commission. It would produce the plague of heroin addiction, the creation of the military-industrial complex, the globalization of poverty, and the demise of nationalism. And it would result in unprecedented mass migrations, widespread coup d'etat, the onset of covert operations Condor, and the emergence of radical Islam and international terrorism. At 6'3" and 200 pounds, Rhodes was an imposing figure on the campus of Oxford University. He has a leonine head, light blue eyes, wavy brown hair, a carefully groomed mustache, and a ruddy complexion. The forcefulness of Rhodes' appearance was offset only by his tinny voice. Still in all, he possessed so much charisma that one contemporary claimed that Belian Rhodes already had developed habits that would lead to his early demise. He was a chain smoker with a preference for nicotine-rich Turkish tobacco and a prodigious consumer of alcohol. Day in and day out, he drank huge quantities of wine, whiskey, beer, champagne, and Russian Kummel liqueur. The Masonic roots of Rhodes, dreamed of a world ruled by a small cadre of Englishmen, was rooted in Freemasonry, which had been created in 1716, when a group of British nobles gathered at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House to establish the Grand Lodge of London. The nobles, including Anthony Sayer, John Theophilus de Sacliers, and George Payne, were imbued with the thought of St. Isaac Newton, who had insisted the doctrine of the Trinity was a massive fraud that had perverted the legacy of primitive Christianity. Newton further maintained that the worship of Christ in place of God, the first cause and grand architect of the universe, was idolatrous. Like Newton, the men at the alehouse shared a fascination with the geometry of Solomon's temple, as described in the first book of Kings, believing, like Newton, that the temple's harmonious components, the golden sections, the conic sections, and the spirals of orthographic projection, belied an ancient history which contained the secrets of the true God of the universe, a being of infinite light whose existence could be uncovered by proper use of abstract mathematics and Newtonian physics. The fact that this shared belief smacked of Gnosticism, an ancient heresy that had been condemned by the fathers of Western Christianity, proved to be of little concern to the forgers of modern Freemasonry. To understand Freemasonry, we have to look at Gnosticism. Within the Gnostic Gospels, including the Gospel of Truth and the secret teaching of John, Christ was sent by the monad, the unknown God of Acts 17 to 23, to inform man of his true nature as a spiritual being and to enable the soul to escape Ialdaheoth, or the demiurge, the malevolent god of the Old Testament, by a series of secret passwords and to return to the realms of true light. Like the Gnostics, the founders of Freemasonry saw themselves as emissaries of the highest God, a being immeasurable light. Knowledge of the spark of the monad that is implanted in every human being, they came to believe, can only be obtained by members of Freemasonry through a series of gradual steps or degrees until they are worthy of entering the Arcanum Arcanorum, the fraternity within the fraternity, and to receive the truth which it calls light. Upon receiving this truth, Freemasons came to realize that the Prince of Darkness made Adam, whose soul was of the divine light, so that he belonged to both empires, that of light and that of darkness. Those who remain in the lesser degrees remained unaware that he who bears the light, that is, the divine being whom they profess to seek, is in fact Lucifer, the son of morning. Manly P. Hall, the leading exponent of Freemasonry, maintained that the seething energies of Lucifer are in the hands of every Freemason who has learned the true mystery of his craft. On a supernatural level, it remains remarkable that Rhodes received his vision of a new world order on the very day he underwent the initiation rite of Freemasonry, in which he was pledged to serve as a light bearer. It remains equally remarkable that every member of his secret society and its American counterparts would also belong to Masonic lodges. The founders of Freemasonry, who gathered at the Goose and Gridiron Ale House, wanted their society to be open to men of various professions, provided they be approved by the leaders of the lodge and submitted to a secret rite of initiation. The religion of Freemasonry, Albert G. Mackey wrote in his Encyclopedia of Masonry, is not sectarian. It admits men of every creed within its hospitable bosom, rejecting none and approving none for his particular faith. It is not Judaism. It is not Christianity. It does not meddle with sectarian creeds or doctrines, but teaches fundamental truth. At its altar, men of all religions may kneel. To its creed, disciples of every faith may subscribe. The Masonic religion quickly spread to South Africa, India, Ireland, Germany, the Netherlands, Russia, Spain, and France, where it helped to spark the French Revolution. In the United States, the list of Freemasons came to include George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, Ethan Allen, Patrick Henry, Paul Revere, John Brown, John Paul Jones, John Hancock, John Marshall, Thomas Paine, William Randolph, and Roger Sherman. The federalism that constituted the core of the U.S. Constitution was identical to the federalism laid out in the Freemasonry Constitution of 1723. By the time Rhodes received the brainstorm, Masonic lodges had sprouted up in China, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and South America. Freemasonry espoused a religion that could be embraced by Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists, a religion that served to unite all of mankind in one system of belief. The Constitution of 1723 stated, "No private piques or quarrels must be brought within the door of the lodge, far less any quarrels about religion or nations or state policy. We being only as Masons of the Catholic religion above mentioned, we are also all nations, tongues, kindreds, and languages. But this one world religion, Rhodes believed, could only be established on the basis of global political and economic unification." He wrote in his Confession, "I see the wealth and power Masons possess, the influence they hold, And I think over their ceremonies, and I wonder that a large body of men can devote themselves in what at times appear the most ridiculous and absurd rites without an object and without an end. The goal of the Freemasons when started and today is to achieve the religious, political, and economic unification of the world through a one world government and one world religion, that of the Catholic Church. Rhodes realized by his vision that this was an achievable goal. The process, in fact, had already begun, almost overnight. England has been industrialized by a revolution that gave birth to spinning machines and high-pressure steam engines that could be used not only in mining and manufacturing, but also to power locomotives and cargo ships. Huge foundries, munitions plants, canneries, and silk mills had sprouted up in cities throughout England, thanks to the newborn concept of financial capitalism. Raw material was being shipped to English plants and factories from the four corners of the globe. Goods were being created in such quantity that the surplus could be shipped out to ports throughout the world, and the English banking system came to the fore as the leading force in international affairs and economies. What do we know about the start of the Freemasons? The Masons were different. In the Middle Ages, from the 13th to the 15th centuries, in England, France, and Central Europe, there was a general feeling that the Masons were different from other people. Most of the population were serfs, working on the land of their feudal lords, and they never traveled beyond their native village, except to walk along the King's Highway to the nearest market town, but some of the more enterprising among them of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury, or to the shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham in Norfolk, or occasionally going to France to serve the English king in his wars against the French. In the towns, craftsmen made things, and traders bought and sold them. Weavers made cloth, goldsmiths made rings and jewelry, and carpenters built wooden houses for the local inhabitants or the town council. But the Masons were different. They worked in stone, and very few buildings were built in stone. Only the castles of the king and of those noblemen to whom he gave permission to castellate and build castles, and the cathedrals, abbeys, and parish churches were built of stone. So the king, some of his nobles, and the Roman Catholic Church were the Masons' only employers, though occasionally an important bridge would be built of stone. London Bridge, which until the 18th century was the only bridge over the Thames below Kingston, was originally built of wood, but after it was destroyed in 1176, it was decided to rebuild it in stone. It did indeed last for ages long. After they had finished building it in 1209, it lasted 623 years, and when it was demolished in 1832, it was not because of any fault in the structure, but because the stone pillars on which the bridge was built were too close together to allow the larger ships of the 19th century to pass beneath. One may ask, who was the fair lady, Lady Leah, over whom the people danced when they crossed the bridge, entered the houses, which were built on both sides of the bridge? Everyone knew all about her. She was a young virgin who had been walled up alive in one foe the stone columns of the bridge by the Masons when they were building the bridge as a human sacrifice to appease God's wrath and induce him to preserve the bridge from destruction by gales or floods. From its beginning, through Rhodes, the population of England soared from 8.3 million 1801 to 30.1 million at the time of Rhodes. Wealth became confined to those who controlled the means of production and finance. The industrial merchant became replaced by the industrial millionaire. Marx and Engels, in their Communist Manifesto, explained, all old established national industries have been destroyed or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations. By industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants, satisfied by the production of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. The thought of Cecil Rhodes was inexorably bound to these changes in material productivity. All of this led to the superiority of the British race evident in Rhodes by the fact that the tiny island of England already ruled an empire that consisted of over 25% of the world's population and landmass. The empire included India, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Gibraltar, the West Indies, and several colonies in Africa. The inhabitants of these colonies, Rhodes believed, were beings who had not fully evolved from their ape-like ancestors and therefore were totally incapable of self-rule. The native is to be treated as a child and denied the franchise. We must adopt a system, Lucifer's system, of despotism in our relations with the barbarians of South Africa. Casting aside any attempt at eloquence, Rhodes added, "I prefer land to niggers." This racial awareness provided the impetus to the Rhodes Confession. I contend that we are the finest race and that the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. Rhodes wrote, "Just fancy those parts that are at present inhabited by the most despicable specimens of human beings. What an alteration there would be if they were brought under Anglo-Saxon influence. Look again at the extra employment a new country added to our dominions gives. I contend that every acre added to our territory means in the future birth to some more of the English race who otherwise would not be brought into existence. Added to this, the absorption of the greater portion of the world under our rule simply means the end of all wars." Having these ideas, what scheme could we think of to forward this object? And he, Cecil John Rhodes, the son of a country vicar in England, had been singled by divine providence in the process of natural selection to establish British rule over all creation and to bring an end at long last to the sad human spectacle of war and ruin. It was the magazine called The Economist in its Millennium issue that wrote an article titled "The Scramble for Africa." It stated, "Won all the targets of European empire builders, Africa was nearest, and Black Africa among the least advanced. Yet save for its far south, it was the last to be grabbed. Its coast had been known to Europeans for centuries and was dotted with their trading posts. But until around 1860, the interior was protected. Fevers killed off intruding white men, roads were few, and cataracts blocked access by river. Then, setting off from their enclaves along the shores, European explorers began to walk old Arab trade routes. They searched for the truth of ancient stories about the dark continent and the sources of its mighty rivers. By 1862, they had reached the source of the Nile. A little later, they traced the route of Niger. They confirmed the reality of Africa's fabled riches: ivory, gold, diamonds, emeralds, copper. Entrepreneurs also saw that instead of buying crops like cotton or palm oil from their villagers, they could set up plantations and use cheap local labor to work them. Africa was becoming too valuable to be left to the Africans. Providence in 873 had brought Rhodes at the age of 16 to the mining settlement of Kimberley. He had arrived in Africa to work on his elder brother Herbert's cotton farm in Natal. After 2 years of drought and crop failure, Cecil headed off for fame and fortune at the newly discovered diamond field 500 miles away on the Vale River. For months, Rhodes has eked out a meager existence by working in a pit with hundreds of other prospectors. The pit would become the largest hole ever dug on the surface of the earth, a crater measuring 42 acres across and 3,583 feet deep that had been dug by 5,000 miners with picks and shovels. When the miners unearthed chunks of crystalline carbon, they sold the rocks to the dozens of Jewish merchants, including Alfred Beit, who had descended on the settlement. These merchants, in turn, cut and polished the stones into luminescent diamonds. The mining settlements consisted of thousands of canvas tents and ironclad shacks, along with 40 bars and brothels. Typhus was prevalent. The temperature averaged 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, and the air was perpetually thick with clouds of flies. Visiting Kimberley in 1887, Anthony Trollope wrote, "If there be a place on God's earth in which a man can thoroughly make or mar himself within that space of time, it is the town of Kimberley. I know no spot more odious in every way to a man who has learned to love the ordinary modes of English life. It is foul with dust and flies. It reeks with bad brandy. It is fed upon potted meats. It has not a tree near it. It is inhabited in part by tribes of South African who have lost all the picturesqueness of niggerdom in working for the white man's wages. The wild man himself is insolent, ill-dressed, and ugly. The weather is very hot, and from morning till night there is no occupation other than that of looking for diamonds, and the workers attending it. Diamond grubbers want food and brandy, and lawyers and policemen. They want clothes also, and a few horses, and some kind of education is necessary for their children. But diamond searching is the occupation of the place. And if a man be sharp and clever and able to guard what he gets, he will make a fortune there in 2 years more readily, perhaps, than elsewhere." Adding to the hellish conditions, Trollope noted, the settlement was subjected to torrential downpours that transformed the deep pit into a massive yellow quagmire. In order to augment his income, Rhodes teamed up with Charles Rudd, another fortune seeker, to import an ice machine from England in order to manufacture ice cream for the sun-scorched miners. The ice cream business became such a success that Rhodes and Rudd were able to buy old agricultural steam engines, which they converted into water pumps to drain the mines when they became flooded with rainwater. By 1876, when Rhodes returned to Oxford to continue his studies and to become a Freemason, he already had become a very wealthy man. We went over a brief history of Rhodes in order to set the stage for just how Rhodes moved into position to destroy the United States of America. In those days, Oxford remained under the spell of John Ruskin, the celebrated Don, who in his inaugural lecture of February 8, 1870, had called upon the university community to take up the cause of British imperialism. I bet you thought what is going on today in brainwashing our university students was new. Absolutely not. It has been part of the university system since the Jesuits started it. The British imperialism cause stated that there is a destiny now possible to us, the highest ever set before a nation to be accepted or refused, Ruskin said. We are still a race mingled with of the best northern blood. We have a firmness to govern and the grace to obey. You might wonder about this bloodline. It was and still is the bloodline of Cain. We are race in an inheritance of honor, bequeathed to us through 1,000 years of noble history that should give you a better understanding of the system they are talking about. Britain must found more and mere colonies as fast as she is able, formed by her most energetic and worthiest men, seizing every fruitful waste ground she can set her foot on, and they are teaching her colonists that their chief virtue is fidelity to their country. The kingdom of England is ruled by one of Lucifer bloodline children controlled by the Roman Catholic Church through the Jesuits, and that their first aim is to advance the power of England. Such colonization, Ruskin insisted, would result in the institution of global socialism. Do you still think that today is a new thing? He said, The first duty of a state is got see that every child born therein shall be well housed, clothed, fed, and educated, till it attains years of discretion. But in order to the effecting of this, the government must have an authority over the people, slavery, of which we now do not so much as dream. Wow. Think still, our system is not under the same system as then. Such stirring words had set the stage at Oxford for the appearance of Cecil Rhodes, who embraced this teaching. The first step toward a new world order, Rhodes believed in accordance with his brainstorm, was the conquest of Africa, with its vast reserves of diamonds, gold, iron ore, coal, and timber. Africa is still lying ready for us. It is our duty to take it, he wrote in his confession. It is our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory, and we should keep this one idea steadily before our eyes, that more territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses. Well, do you still think our society is not just another year in history? Throughout his life, Rhodes' belief in the necessity of the British conquest of Africa remained unanswered. 15 years after penning his confession, he confided the following to William H. Stead, one of his most ardent disciples. If there is a God, it is clear that he would like me to do what he is doing himself. And he is manifestly fashioning the English-speaking race as chosen instrument by which he will bring in a state of society based upon justice, liberty, and peace. I wonder what God he is speaking about here. He would like me to paint as much of the map of Africa British red as possible, and to do what I can elsewhere to promote the unity and extend the influence of the English-speaking race. The second step was the restoration of America to the imperial fold of Great Britain. Rhodes wrote, I once hear it argued by a fellow in my own college, I am sorry to own it by an Englishman, that it was good thing for us that we have lost the United States. There are some subjects on which there can be no arguments, and to an Englishman this is one of them. But even from an American's point of view, just picture what they have lost. Look at their government. Are not the frauds that yearly come before the public view a disgrace to any country, and especially theirs, which is the finest in the world? Would they have occurred had they remained under English rule great, as they have become? How infinitely greater they would have been with the softening and elevating influences of English rule. Think of those countless number of Englishmen that during the last 100 years would have crossed the Atlantic and settled and populated the United States. Would they have not made without any prejudice a finer country of it than the low-class Irish and German emigrants? All this we have lost, and that country loses owing to whom? Owing to 2 or 3 ignorant, pig-headed statesmen of the last century. At their door lies the blame. Do you ever feel mad? Do you ever feel murderous? I think I do with those men. When Rhodes penned these words, America was only beginning to acquire significant economic status, and its wealth remained confined to families like the Astors, the Vanderbilts, the Morgans, and the Rockefellers, all of whom had deep roots in Britain and strong ties to the House of Rothschild, which had funded their business ventures. Before returning to South Africa at the close of the summer semester, Rhodes suffered what has been described as a heart attack and nervous breakdown. His friends found him in his room, blue with fright, his door barricaded by a chest of drawers, while insisting that he had seen a ghost. This experience served to convince Rhodes that his life would be short, and that little time remained to make his dream of a new world order a reality. And so, to his confession, Rhodes added these words: the society should inspire and even own portions of the press, for the press rules the mind of the people. Does this not sound familiar? The society should always be searching for members who might, by their position in the world, by their energies or character, forward the object, but the ballot and test for admittance should be sever. What do you think our CIA is doing today? Once make it common, and it fails. Take a man of great wealth who is bereft of his children, perhaps having his mind soured by some bitter disappointment, who shuts himself up separate from his neighbors and makes up his mind to a miserable existence. To such men as these, the society should go gradually disclose the greatness of their scheme and entreat him to throw in his life and property with them for this object. I think that there are thousands now who would eagerly grasp at the opportunity. Such are the heads of my scheme. For fear that death might cut me off before the time for attempting its development, I leave all my worldly goods in trust to S.G. Shippard and the Secretary for the Colonies at the time of my death to try to form such a society with such an object. Sidney Godolphin Shippard, a fellow adventurer from South Africa, had joined Rhodes at Oxford. He would become the first administrator of the British Protectorate of Bechuanaland, now known as Botswana. In September 1877, Rhodes returned to Kimberley and his very small two-roomed corrugated iron house with a wooden floor, iron walls and roof. To this humble dwelling, he invited his closest friends and confidants for a dinner meeting. The guests included Joseph Orpen, who would become an influential administrator to the British Crown in South Africa, Henry Caesar Hawkins, son of the resident magistrate of the Unkamas Valley, Albert Beit, a German Jew who dealt in diamonds, Leander Starr Johnson, a youthful physician, Charles Rudd, Shippard, and Louis Michel, a prominent South African banker who recorded the words of Rhodes to the gathering as follows: "Gentlemen, I have asked you to dine because I want to tell you what I want to do for the remainder of my life. I think that as a man, when he is young, determines to devote his life to one worthy object and persists in that he can do a great deal during his life, even if it is to be a short one, as I know my life will be. The object to which I intend to devote my life is the defense and the extension of the British Empire. The British Empire stands for the protection of all the inhabitants of a county in life, liberty, fair play, and happiness, and is the greatest platform the world has ever seen for these purposes. It is mainly the extension of the empire northwards that we have to watch and work for in South Africa." The men in attendance were so moved by these remarks that they agreed to join with Rhodes in devoting their lives and wealth to the extension of British rule over all creation. Their commitment was to be without personal reservation. For this reason, Rhodes urged his band of brothers to avoid all emotional entanglements, including marriage. "I hate people getting married," he said, "because they simply become machines and have no ideas beyond their respective spouses and offspring." The new initiates to the Kimberley Club took this advice to heart, thereby granting a hint of monasticism to their society, which would evolve into a hotbed of homosexuals and pederasts.
You have been listening to Bridge of Truth, brought to you by biblical teacher and author Jim Pugh with God is Government. For free access to all of Jim Pugh's Bridge of Truth podcast, please go to www.godisgovernment.com. Distribution of the Bridge of Truth and all other teachings are available for worldwide distribution. Thank you for joining us in this broadcast of Bridge